The single-stack magazine. Picture a slim, narrow column where every cartridge sits directly on top of the one below it, nose facing forward, in a perfectly straight vertical line. That is a single-stack magazine, sometimes called a single column or single feed design, and it is the oldest, simplest way to store multiple rounds inside a detachable box. Because the top cartridge touches both feed lips evenly on either side, the round strips forward in a clean, straight path with almost no lateral drag, which is part of why single-stack pistols have a reputation for exceptionally smooth cycling. The classic Colt M1911 carries 7 rounds of 45 ACP this way, and that same layout survives today in ultra-slim carry pistols built specifically around a narrow grip, since a single column of ammunition only needs to be as wide as one cartridge case. The trade-off is capacity. A single-stack magazine of a given length holds noticeably fewer rounds than a staggered design of the same size, which is exactly the limitation that pushed designers toward a wider column just over a decade after the 1911 first entered service. Modern manufacturers still lean on the single-stack design whenever concealment matters more than round count, which is why deep concealment pistols like the Glock 43 and the Car PM9 both hold just 6 rounds in exchange for a grip barely wider than the cartridges themselves. The double-stack magazine. In the early 1920s, John Moses Browning began designing a new service pistol for the French military, and after his death in 1926, Belgian engineer Dieudonné Saïve finished the job by staggering the cartridges into 2 overlapping columns that narrowed into a single feed point at the top. The result, adopted by Belgium in 1935 as the Browning High Power, carried 13 rounds of 9mm, nearly double what the Luger or the 1911 offered at the time, which is exactly why F.N. Herstal named it the High Power. That staggered double-column layout is now the industry standard for full-size service pistols, with modern examples like the Glock 17 holding 17 rounds in a magazine barely longer than a single-stack 7-round 1911 magazine. The staggered column narrows to a single feed lip exit at the very top, which is more resistant to jamming than simply widening a single feed design would be, though it does require a noticeably thicker grip to accommodate the extra column of ammunition. That single trade-off, a wider grip in exchange for nearly double the capacity, is the exact reason nearly every modern police and military sidearm on Earth now uses a double-stack magazine, from the Beretta 92 to the current generation Glock 19. The Tubular Magazine. Long before detachable box magazines existed, the 1860 Spencer rifle stored 7 rimfire cartridges nose to tail inside a straight metal tube, one of the very first repeating rifle magazines ever issued to soldiers. That same tube design lives on today, running parallel beneath the barrel of nearly every lever-action rifle and mounted under the barrel of pump-action shotguns like the Remington 870, where a spring-loaded follower pushes each round rearward toward a lifter that raises it into line with the chamber. Because the rounds sit nose to tail rather than side by side, the tip of one cartridge rests directly against the primer of the round in front of it, which is exactly why traditional lever-action rifles are loaded with flat or round nose bullets instead of sharply pointed ones, to prevent recoil from driving a pointed tip into a primer under recoil. Modern polymer-tipped ammunition has gotten around that limitation with a soft, crushable tip, but the core tubular design remains unchanged. In a 12-gauge shotgun, an extended tube can hold 7 or 8 shells, giving pump guns a genuine capacity advantage over many detachable box-fed designs of similar length, and a classic Winchester Model 1873 lever-action rifle in its full-length rifle configuration could carry as many as 15 rounds inside its underbarrel tube. The Rotary Magazine. Also called a spool magazine, this design traces back to a patent filed by John Smith in 1856 and later refined by Otto Schonauer around 1900 into the spool magazine used in the Mannlicher Schonauer rifle, adopted by the Greek army in 1903. Rather than stacking cartridges on top of each other, a rotary magazine holds each round in its own individual slot around a star-shaped, rotating sprocket turned by a wound torsion spring that indexes the next cartridge into line with the chamber as the action cycles. That individual separation makes rotary magazines especially reliable with rimmed cartridges, since there is no risk of one round's rim catching on the one above it the way it can inside a stacked box magazine. The bolt-action Krag-Jørgensen rifle, designed in Norway in 1886, used a closely related built-in rotary magazine and was adopted by Denmark in 1889, the United States in 1892, and Norway itself in 1894, though it proved slow to reload since it loaded one round at a time through a side-mounted gate. The design is still very much alive today, most famously inside the factory 10-round magazine of the Ruger 10/22 rifle, as well as the bolt-action Ruger American series and the Sticher SSG 69 precision rifle. Its compact, flush-fitting profile sits neatly inside the stock, though that same compact shape limits most rotary magazines to somewhere between 5 and 10 rounds, far short of what a drum or a stacked box can hold. The drum magazine. No magazine shape is more instantly recognizable than the drum, forever associated with the Thompson submachine gun of the 1920s and 1930s, which fed from cylindrical 50 and 100-round drums built around a spring-driven spider gear assembly, dwarfing the same gun's own 20 and 30-round box magazines and demonstrating just how much extra capacity the drum shape could pack into a similar footprint. Inside a drum magazine, cartridges sit parallel to the axis of rotation, and a coil spring, wound by hand before use, forces a rotating partition to push the entire column of rounds along a spiral path toward a single exit slot. That same basic principle scaled up dramatically in later designs like the Soviet RPK light machine gun's 75-round drum, built to keep a squad automatic weapon firing far longer between reloads than any box magazine could manage. More recent designs like the Beta C-Mag split the ammunition across two side-by-side drums that combine into one feed path, improving weight distribution compared to a single oversized drum. The trade-off across every drum design remains the same. Significantly more weight, a noticeably slower reload than swapping a straight box magazine, and a long-standing reputation for jamming more often under sustained hard use. The internal magazine. Also called a fixed, integral, or blind box magazine, this design is built directly into the receiver of the rifle rather than being removable at all. Classic bolt-action hunting rifles like the Mauser 98 and the Remington 700 carry their ammunition, typically 3 to 5 rounds, inside a magazine well-machined straight into the receiver, loaded either one round at a time through the open bolt or all at once from a stripper clip pressed down into the action. To unload, the shooter simply cycles the bolt to eject each round, or on some rifles opens a hinged floor plate on the underside of the stock to drop the entire column out at once. Because there is no magazine well cut wide enough to accept a detachable box, the receiver around an internal magazine can be built narrower and more rigid, which many precision rifle shooters credit for the exceptional accuracy reputation these actions have carried for more than a century. The obvious trade-off is reload speed, since there is no way to simply swap in a fresh, preloaded magazine the way a detachable design allows. The Pan Magazine. Easy to confuse with a drum magazine at a glance, a pan magazine actually orients its cartridges perpendicular to the axis of rotation, arranged flat in a circle like spokes on a wheel, rather than parallel to it like a drum. Mounted on top of the firearm, a pan magazine rotates around a central axle as the gun's action pulls each round into the feed path, a mechanism perfected on the World War I-era Lewis gun, which carried either 47 or 97 rounds in its distinctive flat, rotating pan. The Soviet DP-28 light machine gun used the same basic layout with a 49-round pan through the Second World War, and Soviet infantry crews often carried several loaded pans as spares in the field. The pan magazine's real advantage was solving an early automatic weapons problem. Rimmed cartridges, common in that era, jam easily when stacked in a straight column because one round's rim can catch on the rim of the cartridge behind it, but arranging them radially in a flat pan avoids that conflict entirely. Once rimless cartridge designs became the global standard after the Second World War, the pan magazine's core advantage disappeared, and the design faded out almost completely in favor of drums and box magazines. The Helical Magazine. Take the drum concept and stretch it into a long spiral running the length of a cylindrical housing, and the result is a helical magazine, developed by Michael Miller and Warren Stockton in the mid-1980s and brought to market by Calico Light Weapon Systems. Inside the housing, a rotating drive member indexes cartridges along that spiral track toward a single feed port, allowing the Calico M950 pistol and M960 carbine to carry 50 or 100 rounds of 9mm in a single cylindrical magazine mounted on top of the receiver, while the company's .22 caliber M100 series used the exact same feed system at rimfire scale. Unlike a wound drum magazine, a helical magazine's spring only needs to be tensioned immediately before firing, which means it can sit loaded indefinitely without the spring fatigue that eventually weakens other high-capacity designs. That same spiral mechanism appears in the Russian PP-19 Bison submachine gun, which wraps its helical magazine around the barrel itself rather than mounting it on top. The trade-off is mechanical complexity and added weight. A fully loaded 100-round Calico magazine weighs in at over 2.5 kilograms on its own, and Calico's own Firearms earned a lasting reputation for reliability issues that kept the helical magazine a permanent novelty rather than a genuine replacement for the standard box. For raw concealment, nothing beats the narrow profile of a single stack. For duty and defense, the double stack is the undisputed standard. For hunting rifles and shotguns built around tradition and reliability, tubular, rotary, and internal magazines still do the job exactly the way they always have. And for anyone chasing sheer volume of fire, the drum, the pan, and the helical magazine all answer the same question in 3 very different, very heavy ways.